Thanks for tuning in, guys. You're listening to Ace Comicals. I'm Greg Driver. I'm joined by Rahul Jani and Leon Everett. Let's go! Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ace Comicals episode number 88. And today we are here to discuss Batman: The Long Halloween. Before we get to that, though, I am joined by my co-hosts, as always, Ray and Leon.
Hey, Greg. Hey.
And today we have a couple of special guests. These are the guys from the Story X Story, the Mayamada podcast, Story X Story. We have Nigel and Tazziii.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, so all good. All good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad today.
Yeah,
right.
So this is kind of like, because I appeared on Story X Story and did a guest spot with them, and we talked about The Dark Knight, and now we're going to talk about the comic that The Dark Knight is heavily based on. And I've got you guys over here now to talk to us on Ace Comicals.
It's like one big crossover thing.
The other side of the coin.
Yep. Other side of the coin, yeah. Yeah. So we're the scratch side, I think. So, Nigel, you want to tell the Ace Comical listeners what you do?
So I'm the co-founder of Mayamada and largely make comics. Well, actually, most of the time is writing emails, but occasionally I find time to make comics, manga comics specifically. So Mayamada is a universe of characters and stories, and we have different stories that we produce. We also run a video game event called Gamepad, and I, before the pandemic, did workshops with young people in schools around storytelling and creativity.
And Tazziii?
So I work with Mayamada on the Story X Story podcast and also with Gamepad, but I am mainly a content creator. I mainly stream on Twitch, but you'll find me on like every platform that content is created pretty much.
Cool. Like generally speaking, how has everybody been? Because I think, is this like now the 5th episode we've done during lockdown? I can't count anymore.
Yeah, I have no idea.
What even is time? You know. So
I think it's always been in lockdown.
Yeah,
I didn't have much concept of time before lockdown either, so now I'm completely out of whack.
I think this might be the 5th episode we've done. So what has everybody been doing in between times to kind of keep busy? So like this is like the little update segment we would normally do, I guess, but yeah, it's going to be a bit different this time because it's not like we can go out and about and hit the cinema and things, is it?
No. Those were the days.
Yeah, so guests go first, I suppose. So guests up first. So how have you been keeping yourself busy? What kind of things have you been doing? What sort of media have you been consuming? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have been, a bit more Netflix, just a little bit more. Just watching some stories. Been actually just watching The Last Dance on Netflix. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but it's that's been really, really impressed with that. Just as a kind of a bit of a basketball fan, sort of more recently, so interested in sort of the historical aspect of that particular season and the legend around Michael Jordan. So been doing that, been working on writing stories. So one of the things that the sort of pandemic lockdown phase we're in right now has given me is that just like time to think about and write our next manga story. So been enjoying that process as well.
Cool.
I've been doing a lot of troubleshooting. All my technology just seems to not want to work for me at the moment. But yeah, I've like watched quite a bit of Netflix. To be fair, I've probably watched less Netflix series and more films because my friends have been doing a lot of movie nights, a lot more than we normally do, because we're like, well, they need to keep their sanity, and so every evening they're like movie. And then I've been playing a lot of Animal Crossing. It came out very wrong. A lot of Animal Crossing. And I started The Witcher 3, finally. I've been meaning to play this game for so long, and everyone's so shocked I'd never played it before this. But lockdown kind of gave me the motivation I needed to actually stick my teeth into it.
Nice. Ray, what you been up to?
Yeah, I've also been doing a lot of secondhand animal crossing. So like my
animal crocheting.
That's what, you know what, I kind of actually want to get into some crocheting because I need something else to do with my hands. So like a couple of things that I've started on lockdown, which I can't even remember if I've talked about on cast, but like I've got really into buying freshly roasted coffee beans and then grinding them. And I just literally just half an hour ago bought a really expensive grinder, and like now I'm slightly having buyer's remorse, but I don't have the brain capacity to think about it because I have to do this podcast. I might love it. It's great having like fresh coffee beans and doing that thing and having something which is a bit of a ritual every morning, which, you know, as somebody who grew up religious and then lost it, I feel like it's replacing prayers for me in a way. Like I'm just stood there for 10 minutes grinding by hand, grinding these beans just in a circular motion. But maybe I'm making spurious connections there. Apart from that, I've been playing Bloodborne with a friend of the cast, Marvin, and a couple of people at work. And that's been really good because like I never thought I would enjoy that game. But there's something about like this repetitive loop that is really satisfying while I'm stuck at home and can't really do anything. I think there's something there which I haven't quite figured out. And then I've also been doing the I think I was going to say it as like the Soulsborne of like adult life, which is basically baking, because you just have to keep performing the same thing over and over again, failing at it. Suddenly it's right. And then you get really bored of the simple thing that you've done, and then you have to move on to the next stage and do it all over again and be really shit at it and then improve. Like, but I've been doing a lot of like the cliched bread baking and making naan breads and tepla and rotli and stuff. And
baking's a roguelike, is it?
That's how it feels to me. Like, because like when I play Dead Cells, where I hated it at the start, and then I got really good and I improved, and then I only ever wanted to play the opening couple of levels because that's where my comfort zone was, and then I realized I was kind of bored of it and you want to move on. But yeah, so next I want to try making pastries or something, I guess. But that's why I was saying I want something to do in my hands, like crocheting, something new and satisfying, but from the start, because like the start of a new hobby is always the most exciting bit, because then once you have to commit and like genuinely do something genuinely impressive, that's when it gets hard and I bail out. But
what's that Japanese thing? It's crocheting, but it's like it's a specifically Japanese form of crocheting where you make small characters.
Amaragumi, something like that.
Yeah,
it contains those sounds. Yeah.
Something
that's
like
enough.
that.
That's enough from me, though. Yeah, that's what I've been up to.
I think that might be good for you. I was going to say, I don't think you've lost religion. I think you've just found a new god.
Yeah, well, I can't go to the cinema and pray there anymore. So, yeah.
So that's what, because coffee is your god now.
I'm okay with that. It keeps me up. So.
Yeah. Leon, how have you been occupying yourself?
Occupying myself. That's a deep question, Greg. But with my time, time sort of blurring into one. I'm still playing Breath of the Wild, still playing Warzone, and still playing. Got back into GTA again because, unrelated to it recently being free, I've been playing it with some old work colleagues and like claiming my free money that the game gives. But it's weird to go back and forth between those games because in Breath of the Wild and in Warzone, if you're on like a ledge or you're high up, you can jump off and like got your glider or parachute. And then going back to GTA and forgetting that, it's awful. Like I've just woken up at the hospital a lot of times with that little bit of money gone.
Oh wow. I've been.
I was just gonna say, other than that, I haven't been watching as many movies since the last podcast. Like, I think before I was like chaining some movies, but like I'm in a weird period where a lot of my favorite TV shows that were running have finished, like Devs and Westworld. All I've got left is weekly is The Last Dance, which I've spoken of before, and yeah, you're in that period where it's just like, there's all these movies which I'm just not in the mood for. So then I've been doing the bad thing, which is like, it's like procrastination TV, because so like The Rise of Skywalker was on Disney Plus, but instead of actually watching The Rise of Skywalker, I watched the documentary extra on The Rise of Skywalker. I can't remember the name of it, but like it's actually really good, and in some ways it's better than the movie. It's like a big celebration of like filmmaking, and it goes like super deep into like how they constructed a bunch of things and like various different ideas. It is weird watching that, and then after I did watch the movie, and it's like, oh man, like someone spent 8 months making this little thing that's on screen for half a second in this awful sequence, and it's like it just feels so wasteful.
Yeah.
And then other than that, I also watched the documentary. I think it's called The Director and the Jedi, which is the special documentary on the Last Jedi, and that one's pretty good as well, and more honest in a way. It feels less like we're all friends here having a good time, and it does show like rifts between like Mark Hamill and Rian Johnson, but them sort of getting on the same path towards the end of the project. But yeah, it's like, if you don't want to do anything and you've exhausted YouTube videos, then go into the extras of movies you've already seen and watch that stuff.
Yeah, movie extras on DVDs and Blu-rays are usually something that I pass over or get forgotten about, and like, or I'll watch it once and then not really pay it much mind. But you bring up a good point there. I now feel guilty for all the like special versions of stuff that I've got sitting on my shelf where I've never touched the extras disc.
I think that's the thing I miss the most from the digital age, is not having those things available, or at least easily available to hand. Yeah. So
like, my time has been occupied by, I'm going to bounce off the Last Skywalker thing by saying, is it the Rise of Skywalker? Isn't it? Not the Last Skywalker. I'm confusing two movie titles, but yeah. So we've been like, well, Sophie has been doing like a Star Wars marathon and going back through all the Star Wars films, from starting with Episode 1 and doing it in timeline order, I guess, throughout. Because we had a bit of an argument about this on Friday evening, didn't we? About what is, Friday evening, about what is what is chronological order.
Why would you bring up the thing where Leon was right and we were wrong? Why would you do that?
No, I'm glad to hear it. The listeners need to hear.
Was it chronological? Is it chronological order? I think it is, isn't it? We agree in the end. Leon was right, and it was So she's been watching the films in chronological order.
Well, okay. Like, so I think. Do I really want to get into this? I've asked a bunch of people, and some people have said chronological means the order of release in like real time. So like 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, which is what I thought it was. And a lot of other people are saying that chronological means narrative chronological, meaning episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's done. That's what I'm going to say on it.
Narrative chronological. Your friends got very deep into it, Ray, from what you were telling me. Very deep.
Well, bunch of nerdy analysts. That's what I can expect from
them. Other than that, I've been reading a ton of comics, which will surprise no one. I've like recently purchased all of Hellboy digitally, so I've been like working my way back through that. I bought the Alred Bowie book, which I sort of mention every so often. Like, I'd been mentioning that I wanted to get it, and now I've got it. It's basically like a biography, David Bowie's career, life, etc., in comic form, done by the masterful Mike Allred. So eventually I'm going to get to talk about that it properly when we next do. I think when we next do an episode where we just kind of shoot the breeze about random comics, I'll bring that up. I bought some Daniel Warren Johnson comics recently that have just been shipped to me today. They've just arrived from Amazon. So I got a book called Space Mullet, which is a Daniel Warren Johnson comic, which is based on a webcomic. It is a webcomic. It's a collection of a webcomic. It's the first 4 chapters of that. And that's volume 1. There's 8 chapters of it in total online at the moment. when they I can't find a volume 2 anywhere, but when they do release a volume 2, I'll be getting that. And I also bought something that is published by Image Comics called Ghost Fleet, which is Donny Cates and Daniel Warren Johnson. So that's something else that I'm going to be diving into and checking out, and that they're both quite hefty books. So I'm looking forward to diving into those and being able to talk about them, because it's Daniel Warren Johnson and his art's gorgeous anyway. And then the added bonus of the fact that Donny Cates writes one of them, and Donny Cates is absolutely fantastic. If you go back through the Ace Comicals episodes, you'll see I've spoken about a lot of his stuff, like God Country, Redneck, etc. So yeah, looking forward to diving into those. And also because I like, we like playing board games, me and Sophie, but the problem is most of the board games we own, you need like at least 3 people to make the game work. So what I've had to do is what I've done is I've gone looking for games where you can play it with just 2 people, like a couple of board games. So I've bought 3 board games today that I'm waiting for to arrive, which will probably be arriving tomorrow. Again, on Amazon, because I'm addicted to Amazon at the moment. This is like where I get everything. I mean, I can't get anything anywhere else at the minute, I suppose. I can't just walk into a board game shop or anything, but these were pretty cool looking board games that they're pretty chill looking, and like two or more players. So they work very well with 2 players, which is something that me and Sophie need, because at the moment we've realized we've only got one board game that works with 2 players, and that's a game called Takanoko. That's the only one in our collection that works with 2 players, because we've got things like Catan and everything else, but you need more than 2 players. So I've purchased 3 board games today. I bought a game called Reef, which is about building a coral reef. And you have to build a more beautiful coral reef than your opponent, basically, is the idea of the game. From the looks of it, it looks really interesting and really fun, really colourful and really chill. Another one I bought is called Photosynthesis, which is a game about being a tree, which I thought was quite interesting. You basically have to take over the board with your trees, and you can put your trees in a way that they cast shadow over everyone else's trees and stop the sun from getting into their trees and things like that. It's, again, quite a chill game about being a tree. And then there's another game I bought called Everdell, and there's a bit of a running theme here because these are all really chill and really serene. Everdell is about, imagine, I guess, like a board game about Sylvanian families, because these are like little like woodland creatures that live in settlements, and you are like building a settlement for a group of critters. So I think the idea is, from the looks of it, you get to choose like whether you want to be squirrels or mice or badgers or something, and then you just like you build like a little settlement. It's like this like fantasy anthropomorphic like woodland creature type thing, which sounds cool. So I'm looking forward to cracking those open and giving those a go tomorrow night, or at least one of them. Yeah. And Ray, you talk about buyer's remorse because you spent all that money on a coffee grinder. I've just gone and spent like 120 quid on board games.
So kind of thing you need to keep sane these days, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've got one recommendation to add to that. Me and Anna have been playing Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which is not really a board game. It's more like tabletop mystery kind of thing. We've only got a part way into it. So it's basically you get a list of rules on how to play the game, and then what it comes with is a map of London, a bunch of newspapers that are arranged chronologically, and then you get a bunch of case files that also occur chronologically, and then for each case file you pick up the newspaper that is associated with that case file, and then you have to figure out like what happened, who did it, blah blah blah, using all the rules. And then the deeper you get into the game, that like the second case file will use that week's or that month's newspaper and the one before it, so you slowly amass this like glut of information that you can refer back to, and things that happen in previous cases can affect future cases and stuff like that. And it's interesting. It works really well for 2 players because it's always one person reading the stuff, one person consulting the directory, or like trying to figure out where to go to next, or some taking turns to take notes and stuff. And that one's interesting if you like something chill that you can sit on the couch and sort of read the paper and discuss the case. It's quite
nice.
Cool.
There was a Sherlock Holmes game I was looking at today, actually. I think it's just I think it's literally just called 221 Baker Street.
Okay.
And it sounds very similar to that because you move around the board, but as you move around the board, you solve cases. And the first person to make a circuit around London, I think, solving and solve so many cases and return to 221 Baker Street and announce who the killer is or whatever is the winner.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, this sounds quite different. Like, it's the same theme, but it's a different concept because you're co-oping on discussing all the information. It's not like a board with pieces or anything.
Oh, cool. Okay, that sounds cool. I have to check that out. So I guess we should probably move into the comics now, being as this is a comics podcast. So we are here primarily today to discuss The Long Halloween, which is one of my favorite Batman books. It is. I'm pretty biased here, but I'm going to say it's a seminal masterpiece as far as Batman comics go, because I think this is a fantastic book. It is a definitive Batman story. It's one of a pantheon of highly acclaimed and what tend to be considered essential Batman books, alongside things like Batman Year One, Hush, Dark Knight Returns. It's up there with those kind of books. It's the kind of bookshelfy one that you see in. It's not something that's confined to comic stores. It's somewhere that's out there amongst wider literature. This is just a comic that I love to talk about, and we'll talk about at any given opportunity. And I think a couple of you guys feel the same. Leon, Ray.
First, how about Nigel, Tazziii? How do you guys? What's your general thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, because when we were talking about The Dark Knight and sort of this came up, and sort of realizing how important it is to that film, having now read it, I sort of understand, basically I understand why, and it now makes me want to go back and watch The Dark Knight again, just to see how they've like translated one story from the other. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, because it gives you like a whole new lens to sort of view the movie through, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, because we're coming onto this from the fact that we've recently watched and discussed the Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan movie. That's a Story X Story episode that you can head over and listen to. And this sort of like coming off the back of that, this is where this conversation comes from. So this is kind of like the comic that I read going into watching that film to give context to that film. And I think when I actually originally saw The Dark Knight at the cinema, I'd had this book already before that, and read it a couple of times before the movie came out. And I think I didn't instantly put two and two together, but then like it started to knit together in my head. And by the time the movie came out on DVD, and I had it on DVD and Blu-ray and things like that, so the two are almost one for me most of the time. But I mean, there are like differences and things like that, and the movie does adapts the comic but then adds to it, which is something else we already mentioned on the other podcast, where it will adapt the movie and then add parts of other Batman stories to the mix.
And it's always interesting to see how those decisions were made, like what to take on, what to leave out, depending on what is needed for, I guess in the case of the film, what's needed for that story.
Exactly, yeah. And it's safe to say that this book has had like a bit of an impact and an influence on subsequent Batman stories, comics, movies, and especially The Dark Knight, and also games. And it kind of like reverberates throughout the Batman mythos, and it's gone on to be sort of like one of the main tales that has shaped Batman going forward, I suppose. Tazziii, with first impressions, what did you think?
I'm not a massive comic book reader. Like, I'm trying to get into more comic books because I find them kind of hard to follow. But this was really easy to follow. maybe it is because of the knowledge I have already from the films. But it surprised me, like, in this, the Joker's not really that present. Yeah, I don't know. It seems to be more about Harvey Dent. Yeah, that's kind of it.
Like the first time I read it, I had the same reaction because I wasn't that au fait with Batman and stuff when I first picked it up, and like I remember having that same feeling of being surprised that the quote unquote like usual cast weren't present, and it's because we've kind of been indoctrinated into thinking that the Joker has to be in every single Batman story. But for my part, like the thing that I remember not liking this book that much the first time I read it, and this time I tried not to focus on the plot and the theme because like I didn't have the headspace for it anyway. But I tried to focus on like what you just mentioned, the things that has been like inherited by other forms of Batman stories, and like it's really interesting like focusing on the stuff that the Dark Knight specifically has taken from it. And I think for that, like it, not that I want to attribute value to those things, but I think there's a lot of value in this book because of the things that it sets up for other stories to take on. I think that's where I admire the most about it, which I know sounds quite critical in the grand scheme, but I think it's because I'm trying to find a nice way to be critical, because I don't have super strong positive feelings about this book, and I really want to hear what you guys think in both aspects, like both the comic in and of itself, because it's really hard for me to look back on this as like a seminal classic from the 90s, but divorced of any of the other stories or any of the other, like, you know, overflowing plethora of movies and books and whatever that we have of Batman. I want to hear why you guys specifically like the comic, and then also like what's taken from it going into the movie.
Yeah. Leon, you got any initial thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I guess so. So for me, I think I read this book in the early noughties the first time, and I'd already read a few other of the like the seminal classics that we refer to. So like, yeah, when Dark Knight Returns, Arkham Asylum, stuff like that. And going into this, it was like in context of when it was a cool read, because it was a time where it's like, oh, they've managed to work in like all these different like rogues and stuff like that, and it's a cool portrayal. It's a cool sort of semi-grounded portrayal of like the birth of Two-Face, which I thought was cool. And yeah, it's a story that I don't know. It felt like it really fit. That sort of detective feel Batman that I've been missing, because in this period of time, my Batman fix had been positively refreshed by like the comics I was reading and Batman TAS, and reruns of Batman TAS, but then negatively affected by the Schumacher movies that we had at the time, because this was in the period before we got Batman Begins. So at that time, I was hungry for a let Batman be Batman type thing, like, and not just like brooding, gritty, blah blah. But I love the like, so that the cartoon's got quite like gothic Art Deco-y type look, and I kind of like how this leans more into like film noir, and yeah, I was a big like super film nerd at the time. I mean, still am, but I was in like that film student mode. So it's like it reached a lot of things that I was interested in at the time. So like it really gelled with me. And then I think I read it then, and then obviously watching The Dark Knight and seeing all the similarities, I think I read it again after that. So maybe late 2008, 2009, and then since then I haven't read it since now. And it is to like summarize, because I've been going on. Rereading it now, it is really interesting, because a lot of the things, I still think it's an amazing book, and its place in time is like deserved. But it's funny because like my taste of that stuff, even by the time that like Hush first came out, I was not tired, but I was a little bit like, I'd rather we focus on particular rogues rather than like the delight of rogues turning up from issue to issue, it's sort of gone for me. Obviously, because this comic did it so well, and Hush and other comics have done it well. But like rereading it now, it's like, it's not really what I want from these types of stories. I kind of want a more of a focus on like Batman and people around him and particular rogues, because I like that connection.
Yeah.
Can I just add something from my impression?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just reminded, talking about like how it's quite detective-y. I totally got that as well, and it really reminded me of the Gotham series, and I can sort of see where Gotham's taken its influence from this as well. More of that like detective side and how sort of everyone comes in. But yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, actually, because there's this whole season of Gotham, I think, was actually based, this was like used to as kind of like influence for a season of Gotham. I don't know which season.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to think.
Yeah, because I don't. I mean, I'm not someone who watches Gotham, but I think if I'm going on the Wikipedia and having a look now, just to try and find out for you,
because I'm at season 5 on Gotham, so I'm trying to remember. My memory is so bad with certain things. Like if I've watched it once, it's highly likely I might forget certain details. I probably should get that checked out.
Sorry?
For me, seasons tend to blend into one because I just kind of watch them.
Yeah.
So it's season 4 that adapted some elements of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So according to Wikipedia, season 4.
Even just the procedural elements of like having villain of the week is pretty well crafted in this book. Like that, even though I don't actually like the fact that there's so many, like Leon was saying, I think what I was hungry for is a focused look at specific villains, and I'm not so much into the villain of the week thing. But I have to admit, like it's done quite well. Like everything's brought in quite organically, and I like how the different villains are introduced and what part they play.
Yeah, like how they fit into the story and their place in the story. It's interesting to hear, like, I guess, like the perspective people are coming into it from, because you've got, like Greg, you mentioned, you've read it and then watched The Dark Knight, and in reading it, I've come from seeing The Dark Knight and then looking from that perspective as to, like, almost reverse engineering the influence, if that makes sense. So, like, seeing what from The Dark Knight is in this book, and having that frame of reference versus reading the story initially and then watching the film. So like a lot of the things that you guys are saying is kind of I wasn't fully aware of like the even the idea of having all these different villains sort of turn up in each chapter, which I quite liked. So I guess it kept you guessing as to, you know, which character is going to turn up next and how are they going to impact this investigation, and Bruce Wayne as well, which I didn't get from the film, obviously, but I did enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah. For me, it's the thing that I love the most about this book, the thing that attracts me to it more than anything else, is the fact that it comes out of the work. So run through the creative team and everything else with this first before I even get into this bit. So it's a 13-issue limited series. This is Batman The Long Halloween, originally published by DC in 96 and 97. It comes off of the back of the work that Tim Sale and Jeff Loeb did on Legends of the Dark Knight. They did like 3 Halloween specials, and that kind of like led them into creating this because they were so well received. They've also been collected in a trade, and you can grab those in a trade called Haunted Night, which is basically 3 subsequent Halloween specials that Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale did. Same art style, similar kind of styling, and similar kind of setting and world, I suppose. With this book, this kind of takes the Batman Year One angle and timeline and builds upon that. And this is set early in Batman's career, as we know, because Harvey Dent isn't yet Two-Face, and the city is still run by the Maronis and the Falcones, so it's still under the boot firmly of the organized crime. And this is Batman coming in and cleaning up the city, and coming towards the end of cleaning up the city of its organized crime element, and facing a new threat. And it's that the thing that attracts me to this book the most is the fact that it comes off these Halloween specials, and I adore these Halloween specials. I'm a big Halloween guy, and B, it's also it's that transitional point in the history of Gotham and in the Batman timeline where the criminal element of Gotham, the organized crime element, are giving way to this carnival of nightmares that is Batman's Rogues Gallery. And it's like almost like they usher it in as well, because it's like they, in their weakened state, they turn and in their desperation, they turn to forces they don't quite understand. And in this book, the way they usher in each different rogue in the story is the fact that somehow they are tied into the holiday killings, or they are being consulted or hired by the Maronis or the Falcones to try and get to the bottom of what is going on with the holiday killer, which is the main detective element of the book. There's this holiday killer, so called because they commit killings and murders on public holidays, like Christmas, Thanksgiving, etc. And they appear to be bumping off members of the big organized crime families, the Maronis and the Falcones. And it's because of that it kind of gets the backup of these big families, and they start hiring people like the Riddler, for example, to try and figure out what's going on. And that's what I like about it. The fact that they open the door and they let these more malignant forces in, and then these more malignant forces kind of grow and fill the void when these guys are gone. And even, I suppose, actually, it's a bit of a hostile takeover, really, isn't it? When you get to the end of this book.
Yeah, it does end up like that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so this as well, I like this because Two-Face is one of my favorite Batman rogues. So I like this as, for me, this is my favorite sort of Two-Face origin story next to the Batman TAS Two-Face parts 1 and 2. So Batman the Animated Series did a really, really good 2-episode special where they did the story of Harvey Dent, basically, which was absolutely fantastic, and they handled it really well. And it's a really adult take on it and even though it's a cartoon and it's an animation aimed at children, it's like a really kind of like grown up take on it, because within the TAS episode, they do the whole thing with Harvey being mentally ill and then the scarring just bringing that out in him, and it's the slow burn. And with this, they kind of follow the same suit. Like, Harvey already has the obsession and everything else, and it just takes the scarring to kind of tip him over the edge. And in this book, it's more the fact that Gotham has chewed him up and spat him out, which is something of a theme between this and the Christopher Nolan films, where Gotham takes the best of us and crushes us down and grinds us to dust and spits us out as something else. And I think that's kind of what Nolan got from this, is Gotham being this maw that just kind of takes people and chews them up. And I think that's what you can see happening to Harvey throughout the pages of this book. It took him and it chewed him up. And it's not just him, it's everyone in the book is getting chewed up by Gotham. In some way, shape, or form. Everyone's getting fed on by this city. Gilda Dent is getting fed on by the city. And the best of us are dragged down, kicking and screaming. And, kind of like reflections of our worst selves are left in that place. I mean, even Batman himself, even Bruce Wayne himself was taken and chewed up by the city. That's the whole reason he's Batman. But yeah, it's this theme of escalation and this theme of how the city itself is taking people and warping them and changing them, and it's that slow burn that I like, and like this, even the similarities actually that this shares with those animated series episodes, with like the slow burn and Harvey's temperament and things like that. It's really cool. What I what I did notice actually as well in the Dark Knight movie, this is just like complete opposite, like complete sidetrack. But in the Christopher Nolan movie, the Dark Knight movie, the bit where Two-Face gets his scarring, where he's blown up, is actually kind of ripped from the animated series. And that's kind of the second time they do something like that in that trilogy, because they also had the bit with the Scarecrow poisoning the water supply via the water main below Arkham. In the first one, Batman Begins, and that's also kind of shot for shot from the animated series as well, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that's a complete side point. So I mean, like, as far as Harvey Dent goes and Harvey's downfall goes, I mean, have you guys got anything to add to that? Any other depictions of Harvey Two-Face's origin that you might have seen, that you might think, or any other depictions of Harvey Two-Face, for example? Like, how do you think this kind of lines up with the stuff in the Arkham games and that kind of thing?
I was just going to say that the moment, because you mentioned the differences in the Dark Knight. Well, on our podcast, you mentioned the differences in the Dark Knight depiction of Harvey Dent and his transformation versus this. And I quite like what the way they've done it here. I think, like you previously mentioned, it was a bit. I think you weren't too impressed, I don't know if that's the right word, about how it was done in the film versus the comic. I think you preferred the comic.
Yeah, I do prefer the comic. Yeah. And I think the film takes, like I say, it takes the TAS origin and kind of, it doesn't really do it as much justice as I'd like. But yeah, I prefer the comic one, definitely. I prefer the way they handle Harvey in the comic to the way they handled him in the film.
Yeah. Okay, definitely. I'm gonna have to watch the animated series, because I'm now very interested in the different ways, like, to represent, like, Harvey's transformation. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them, like, sort of follow similar themes, but it's a really good 2 episodes. Probably the best 2. One of my favorite. Well, I don't know. Can I say it's the best 2 episodes? Because it's a lot of really good episodes. But yeah, it's really good. What were we going to say, Ray?
It's me.
Go on, Tazziii.
I was just going to say, I feel like it's a lot slower, but more predictable Dent's decline here. Like, you can see it more, but it takes a lot more time to get there. And it's a lot clearer and more of it feels like more of a journey, whereas I feel like in the film, it for me anyway, it kind of felt a bit more sudden.
It was almost like a turning point in the film versus like a slow decline. And I think in the comic, the addition of his wife really helps that, because you can obviously see the pressure that he's under, but then you also see the additional pressure of having to support his family in that sense, and how that takes a toll. So you just have all those forces kind of dragging on him throughout the course of this story. So, like you say, like Tazziii, it then does become like, okay, there's only one way this is going, because you're in such a bad situation.
Yeah.
I think the film raises him up from the beginning, and like he has further to fall, and then because of that, it feels like a sharper drop. Whereas in the book, he sort of starts off a bit skeevy, and you have like hints of his darkness already, and then because you're introduced to his, like you said, the wife character and like her influence on his mental state, and like you can see why he goes to these places and makes these choices in the comic. That's one part of it I really liked, because again, the thing that it offers the movie, and then the movie like takes from this, I feel like this adds a bit more depth to it.
Leon, where do you fall on this?
Well, what I'd say is that in this incarnation, what's good is because you have those 13 episodes, like you guys have said, it does give you more space to breathe. So there's more like rising dread and tension and sort of like a descent. But which is funny for like not reading it in over a decade, is that I didn't realize, or I didn't remember, how early people were accusing Harvey of being of Holiday. which I thought was kind of novel for the time as well, because you'd think that, because it'd be really, really silly for Batman to never bring that up, him being the world's greatest detective. So that stuff I did appreciate. And like comparing to like other incarnations, I mean, with the Dark Knight especially, what I think the Dark Knight does well is like what Rahul said, is build him up from the beginning and keep him untainted, but then having elements of like being pushed. Whereas this, he's already done with the system, so you kind of have a thing where it's Gordon who's constantly saying, "Oh, we've got to stay in between the lines." Where in the movie it's a bit more flipped, where just talking to Batman makes Gordon a bit tarnished in a way, because he's going outside the law to get the means done, while Den only comes across joins it because it's the best way to get through with the irradiated bills and all that. So like it is funny seeing that comparison, because I think that what the book is best at creating this sort of muddied image, where it's a case of like not just Gotham eating people and spitting them out, but also how with a system that is so corrupt and with people who are just trying their best, there's going to be a lot of sacrifice for like no gain. Whereas I think what the movie does really effectively, especially in its 2.5 hour time frame, is that it has that whole thing of like live long enough to see yourself become the villain, and because they have the Joker as their main villain in that movie, it works perfectly. Like they work in concert together perfectly. Whereas this book doesn't require that as much, because you have it's more focused on the mob and Holiday. So I think those two main versions work best for their mediums. If you want to ask me a preference, it might probably be how go towards the movie, because I feel like the movie is quite clean. But like in like comparing this to say like the cartoon, I think that this one definitely has it's a bit more internal than that, and like some of compared to like other appearances in comics, because this one it's a bit more about the like not just the mental state, because obviously Batman's known for people who are insane or criminally insane, as they put it. But like with this, it just keeps up this grey area, and everyone's tarnished by the grey in some way. Everyone has to work outside of the lines, and like even like Bruce is on talking terms with Falcone and all that. So like it's very muddy, and you can see the mud getting on everyone in this, and I think that's works really well for it.
Definitely, yeah. It's this real noir kind of setting, this real noir city where people are willing to bend the rules to exact justice. And I think
because there's more of a discussion about that in film, about sort of bending the rules, whereas here it's almost just accepted. This is what we do. This is how we get stuff done, and no one stops to consider like, are we doing the right thing?
Well, again, it's the desperation, isn't it? So you've got the desperation of the law enforcement, the people that are working on the right side of the law. Dent and Commissioner Gordon are desperate to solve this problem of corruption within the GCPD and the organised crime. And in their desperation, they've turned to a man they don't fully understand, a man wearing a mask. And then on the criminal side of things, they're doing the same thing. It's this theme of escalation again, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also, actually, I just had another really interesting thought. Imagine this is an episode of Always Sunny, where the beginning of the episode is the conversation on the GCPD rooftop, and then the title card comes up, and it's the gang ruin Gotham.
Yeah, because I found that to be like interesting, because like following on from what Nigel was saying, that like in the movie there's such a big talking about morality, because in that as well it's like a whole thing of like Batman not willing to break his rule, whereas the Joker is taking over and like sort of hoovering up like mob people into his plan. And like in this book, you have that bit where they're on the rooftop talking, and it's like, we need to stay within the rules, right, Batman? Right, Batman? And it's like,
Yeah.
Okay then. And like, I like with that, I guess because this is a comic and everyone knows who Batman is, and it has less sort of heavy lifting from that standpoint to do. Like I say, Greg, there's already this presupposed position of like, yeah, of course our hands are going to get dirty. We just got to make sure we don't kill anyone. That's the only thing. And
the only rule is, yeah.
And that's like very different from like a comic book world and like a film world, even though it's based on a comic book setting.
Yeah, and I do like this whole. This is like the book. Like this is Gotham catching fire throughout this book. This is the fire starting to smolder and then spreading through the city, and like by the end of the book, Gotham is a raging inferno of people in clown paint and whatever. And it's just like it's this carnival of horrors, like I keep saying, and it's fantastic. And this is why I like Gotham. I like this kind of like everyday's Halloween thing that they have going on there. And I like how this book embraces that. I mean, let's just start talk about the book visually a little bit, because we've been talking about like thematically and story wise, but we've not really delved into the visuals. So what I want to do is I just want to get across like how dark and moody and shadowy this book is. Like it has this real dark, moody, shadowy art, and that's the approach to the story of the change in Gotham. It's like old empires crumbling and new, more dangerous foes rising up to fill that subsequent vacuum. And the way the art works, it's like these beautiful fluid forms and shadowy art, almost like everything in the story is a shadow cast in a vivid nightmare quality. So like, because everything's got fluid lines and there's all these like there's a lot of use of darkness and shadow, and that works really well for like the whole noir detective narrative that's going on. But then at the same time, it's like it looks like a nightmare. Like, you know, when you're a kid and you're in bed and you wake up in the middle of the night and the room's pitch black and then you start to pick shapes out of the shadows. That's the kind of well, yeah, when you yeah. Well, that's the kind of vibe I get out of it. Like, where you start to pick out the shapes in the shadows and things, where everything's ever so slightly fluid in form or ever so slightly formless. Like, everything in here is pretty fluid. Like the people's faces and things like that. It's this whole kind of like nightmare thing, like things just coming up out of the liquid or out of the shadow, or you're looking at everything from below water and things like that. And it just has that kind of feeling. Like,
yeah.
It feels like the shadow comes first in all the imagery. So everything's kind of there's shadow, and then the shapes are put into the shadow, rather than having a shape and then adding the shadow after.
Yeah, everything comes out of the shadows, and it's like. Sorry, were you going to say something there, Ray?
No, continue.
All right, okay, yeah. I was going to say, sorry, it's like this whole kind of like everything looks not quite real and looks a little bit exaggerated and more menacing that way. And it works, like I said, for the noir elements, but also for the more deranged elements as well. Like when we get the Joker's face and he's got this like kind of like twisted... Like,
his expression is really, like you say, exaggerated. Like that really comes through in the Joker. Yeah.
It's twisted, like Cirque du Cauchemar type thing going on with like... And yeah, that's one of the reasons I like it as well, because everything's like it's just these, you know, like if you I guess this is like falls under the Halloween thing again, because you know, if you carve a jack-o'-lantern and then you put a candle in it and then you turn it towards the wall, and you get like whatever you've carved on the front of the jack-o'-lantern kind of projected on the wall in a more warped way, that kind of thing.
I love how there's so many scenes of like gigantic Gothic window panes, like casting shadows into the scene. I think that's a really astute observation, like shadows coming first, because I didn't think of it that way when I was reading, but that's like spot on. And like what I was thinking partway through this book is like, it's one of the only Batmans where I'd want to read the Batman Noir version, because like the silhouettes work so well, and because it's already got quite a limited color palette, which I like that they that it is so limited from scene to scene, and they have to like work against that constraint. I think that would look really good in grayscale, in where some other Batman comics wouldn't. I think because everything would get muddied into the black. But yeah, I might check that out after.
I think
But
they.
then, oh,
Sorry.
yeah,
Just going to say, I think they use color really well, like their use of color and use of lack of color. Because when you're in sort of like a daytime, non-shadowy kind of event, so like when Selena and Bruce are talking, or it's sort of like everyone's their sort of social life spots, there is a lot of color and it's less shadowy. So it really helps with how the story flows and how you know what significance this part of the story plays in it.
And it kind of then goes to the opposite end when you see like the Holiday actually kills someone and it's just like black and white, except for maybe like when he leaves an object on the scene and then that's in color. But yeah, when just thinking about like, you know, you go from, you know, what limited color there is from like a social setting to the next victim, and it's just like represented in black and white. And I don't know if it does it for every killing, but I think the paneling as well just goes to like sort of the square, I think like 6 panels on a page, and it's just like each aspect of the killing to the placement of that particular sort of holiday related object.
yeah.
Yeah, I will
And it's
also.
Sorry, continue.
No, I was going to add a little thing, just my general appreciation of the holiday killer for reminding me that dates on the calendar do exist. I did actually quite like that, being reminded that there is such a thing as Halloween, as Christmas, as Valentine's Day, and so on. I feel that was pretty good. It was quite needed in these times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Calendar man.
Yeah.
The hero you need.
He should be given a medal, I think. I think they missed the trick on this.
Yeah.
No, I did want to say that I think that is my favorite construction in this whole comic, is the way that they preserve like the black and white with the splashes of color for the murders. And then I'm sure there's one point towards the end of the comic where like they subvert or corrupt that, where it's normally like outside of viewership, it's like we get to see something that the characters like Batman and Gordon, etc., aren't seeing, because we see the murders as they actually are. We're seeing what is happening to these people, and it's the truth. And then there's moments later on where that's corrupted because we're seeing people's interpretation of what happened. We see like somebody describing what they think happened, and then we get to see somebody else's description of what they think happened. I think it's when somebody's accusing Selena of being the murderer, and you see Selena or Catwoman dressed up in like the trench coat and the hat and everything, and I liked how it takes that one moment to flip it on its head, and you kind of have to wrestle with, are we seeing like the actual truth, or you know what's actually happening there. I like when things set up these stories or set up these constructions and then flip them on their head at one point to make you question it.
Yeah.
Was that when the Riddler came in?
Yeah,
probably.
I did feel that as well. Like I was constantly like, who? Like I don't actually know who the killer is. Like I've not read this comic, so it could be anyone. It doesn't have to, be who I think it is. And so I was constantly there, like, because they did use the drawings and the colors as the representation of whoever was sort of figuring it out at different points. And I was like, oh, and the way that Calendar Man's always like he and she, but in the same sentence. So I'm like, is it a guy or a girl? Like, I'm so confused. And constantly like had me on the edge.
Yes. And I think that pays off really well as well.
It's like Calendar Man already knows.
The funny thing is, like, I have read this book before, and I totally forgot, what the twists and turns were. And like, I'm often slightly disappointed at how Batman stories aren't always really good, like murder mysteries. I expect like Agatha Christie style stuff, and it's like I want Agatha Christie murder mystery, but with hyper real comic book characters, and I very rarely get that. But this one sort of lent more in that direction, and I was really drawn in towards the end of the comic. I think if I can jump back to like broader criticism, I think the first half of this comic doesn't really work for me because all it feels like it's doing is setting up a lot of pieces and being like very construction first. It's like they came up with a concept of, what if somebody was murdered on every holiday, and then they fit a bunch of, the villains from the rogues gallery around that. Like, I'm probably wrong. I'm sure you guys have other thoughts on that, but that's how it felt to me at the start. But then I thought towards the latter half of the comic, it really starts paying off. And yeah, I actually really enjoyed the mystery in this one.
I guess you need that first part to set up the idea of the mystery, and to put the pieces in place to maybe distract the reader, or at least lead the characters down one path or the other, and then start sort of dropping things in place towards the end. I guess like one part needs the other,
which is totally fair. I just feel like I wasn't entertained in the first 4 or 5 issues, whereas I think once it started paying off, I was really much more into it.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Then it's like a question of the balance, really, like how much do you need to set up before you then start paying off certain parts.
I feel like when the payoff is good, and I feel like it is good in this, I don't mind being a little bit bored at the beginning, as long as the beginning's not too long. I don't think it felt too long.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go back to the holiday murders. So when it shows you the murders at the end of each issue. And you brought up a good point with the 6-panel thing, Nigel. As I was going to add to that by saying that these bits are also silent as well as black and white. So they kind of keep them silent panels, and it just kind of adds to the kind of like the breath holding thing. Like,
yeah, definitely.
The silence when you're reading it is like holding your breath and listening to your own heartbeat as it happens.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely felt that as well.
Yeah.
And of Columbo, like, when you get to see what's happening, and then the mystery is about like how Columbo unravels it, and like to me it felt like when those black and white scenes came up, it was like happening in slow motion. There's something, I don't know, there's something that sold that aspect to me really well. Like, I think holding your breath is a really good way to put it.
Because some of it's from Killer POV as well. Is it Dario Argento that does that with his films?
Yeah.
So like the killer point of view,
where like you're getting stabbings from off screen, and we're following the person. Yeah. It
kind of does a little bit of that as well, doesn't it? Which I quite liked. But yeah, that was like one of the most interesting things structurally about the comic. Also, the fact that the panels in each issue and on each page are quite large, and they don't try and fit a lot of different beats on a page. They tend to keep it quite clean with quite large panels, which I think helps with the shadow, this shadow play thing that we were talking about, and all this full page work they do as well. Like, there's an awful lot of like full page scene setting, and the only time when they kind of do it into smaller, they break it down more into less beats is when you've got the killings happening.
Yeah. They tend to use smaller panels the more action there is, and it really helps.
Yeah.
Basically.
It kind of slows things down to a certain extent, and it adds to that overall feel. And like, even as you just talking about the paneling, and I don't know if this is like a completely different story, but I don't know if anyone's read Deadly Class, which is an example of like a comic which is very fast paced and very sort of moment to moment paneling, which is this isn't. It's completely like just slowed down, darker colors, darker themes, and everything adds to that, which is really cool.
Even when there is a lot going on, and you've got the thing going, kind of like you've got like a lot of beats happening on one page. Even then, unless it's like the killings happening, they keep it to larger panels because it gives the art space to breathe. And with art like this, where there's a lot of heavy shadow, you kind of need that. And it really gives you like this like, you kind of really do get a sense of like the space and where the lighting's coming from, and there's just the general like this warped kind of like place that it takes you, these like warped windows that you're staring through into this world. It's great.
Yeah, because
so,
like it kind of has that thing where it's the pacing remains constant as we go through this sort of procedural and like this new holiday where someone's going to be murdered, but then all the issues around those killings are focused on the personal. We spend some headspace in some of the characters, and we see people like Bruce have to deal with his both his parents' deaths and like their legacy on him. We get to see like Harvey and his wife's like just relationship, but also outlook deteriorating, and like obviously he's like never there, so they can't start a family or anything like that. And then we're seeing similar happen with Gordon, where like all of them are like missing Thanksgiving and all that. He's not there to spend any time with his kid, and all while they're doing that, we are sort of propelled forward, and not just by the mystery, but as you're saying, Nigel, by like the pacing, like, and I think that's one of the like the strong like suits of the book, and like relating to what you said earlier, Tazziii, like, would you say that that's like the pacing, the panel size, and all that is what contributed to this being, as you said, an easier read for yourself?
Yeah, definitely. It actually gives you a chance to take everything in. Sometimes I find with other comics I've tried to read, there's so much going on, you never actually get the chance to really take in the artwork because you're trying to read, and there's a lot going on, whereas there is a lot of full page panels and artwork, and you can kind of just take that moment, and they use kind of like how a comic's supposed to. They use that energy to tell the story, and it just has a really nice pacing.
And you read a physical copy of this, right?
Yeah. I ordered it, Amazon.
Yeah, it's a good thing to have as a physical book, I think. And I think I can't imagine ever trying to read this digitally. There's some comics that I would just never ever try to read on Comixology or like pick up digitally, because I think this just works so well, being able to have it physically and see the whole page and everything else.
Yeah, I had one point that I made note of because I was so impressed by like how the pacing and construction on the page worked, because there's a bit in, it's quite early on actually, I think it might have been issue number 2, where they're interrogating Mickey Sullivan, and you sort of see like there's a spotlight on his face that gets slowly smaller and smaller on the one page on the right hand side, and then it leads to a flashback panel at the very bottom of that page, and then when the page is turned, you're like full on in a big splash image of Batman doing something. I forget what it was, but I love how like how you got to see that descent, like the spotlight gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's split into these slightly thinner and thinner rectangles on the page, and then the color palette changes, and like I feel like that moment wouldn't have been sold as well for me if I'd read it digitally and not noticed that like how the color and the construction was changing on these 2 pages from the top left to the bottom right, and then the whole like you flip the page, bam, it's all black and blue and like a whole new setting, and it definitely sells the idea of it being flashback plus like somebody describing what had happened to them. Is super effective.
So just like, does everybody have a favorite chapter? Because I do. I have a part of this book that I love particularly more than any other part, and it's the bit where Jervis Tetch and Jonathan Crane rock up. Because like when they turn up and they're like kind of having these like kind of sing-song arguments and stuff, like in like Alice in Wonderland quotes / nursery rhymes, children's nursery rhymes. I think that's brilliant, and it's like this is my favorite chapter where Batman's like taking on the Scarecrow and the Mad Hatter,
and they change. I think is it for I think it's for Tetch. They changed his lettering, like so the way he talks
Yeah.
comes across as a bit
appreciate that.
maniacal. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the Mother's Day chapter, isn't it?
Yes, because they're
Yes.
going on about how Scarecrow killed his
Yeah.
brother. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I'm
it's
trying to
like, oh, sorry, carry on.
Oh no, I was just trying to think of like a particular favorite chapter.
Yeah.
I did like what they did with the Riddler in terms of just one his moment where he's putting forward all these theories of who could have done it.
Yeah.
And then the end of that chapter where he's the one that doesn't get killed on April Fool's Day. So I like that kind of reversal of the pattern. But then I also liked, I find it hard to pick one, but I also like the, I think it's the Roman's birthday chapter.
Roman holiday, yeah.
Roman holiday, sorry. Yeah, just because that's where there's a lot of pressure on Harvey Dent and like everything kind of really comes on it. I think that's when he has the acid thrown in his face as well.
Yeah.
So like everything comes together for him. Don't know if I like that better than... I can't pick one, is my answer. Can't pick a favourite. Those are two of my favourites, though.
I have the least favourites, if that's okay to bring up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because one of them is the one that you brought up. I liked the banter between Scarecrow and Mad Hatter. That was cool, but like the overall chapter, I thought was quite slight. Like, I was expecting there to be more of how the fear toxin affected Bruce, but like he runs from Gordon in Crime Alley, and it doesn't. I don't know I keep using the word construction, but like the way that the comic is built in that chapter doesn't do much to differentiate the rest of the book from like Bruce's fear-induced hallucinations. But the one thing I really do like about that chapter number 8, Scarecrow, is like when you do see some elements of the fear toxin, it goes into like Game Boy LCD green and grays, which I just thought looked really cool. I think another one that I didn't like. Oh, I really didn't like the Ivy one. I felt like that was really slight. Like it's just, I hate feeling like when the characters on the page are doing dumb stuff. So like you see this hooded person with their face like being covered up, and they hand you a rose that cuts you on the hand. You'd think Bruce, like the smartest man on earth, like the world's greatest detective, would have figured out that it was poison ivy and had done something about it, and then not go on to like possibly ruin his father's legacy or whatever. Like, I don't know, that just irritated me a little bit, and then it kind of didn't lead anywhere important.
But he has to play the character of Bruce Wayne. He can't be Batman while that's happening.
Gonna say that because that goes across Valentine's and the St. Patrick's Day chapters, and they're actually my favourite.
before it, like, so because I want to let you end on a high note with that. The thing I loved about like the transition between those two chapters is it introduces the color green and then goes into St. Patrick's Day, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. So yeah, they're kind of like my two favourite chapters, and kind of because of the reasons why you don't like them.
Which is fair.
Because it's kind of like when Bruce is around Selina or Batman's around Catwoman, either way he acts differently. He's always sort of thrown off slightly, regardless of if it's with or without the masks. And then he sort of like does this. There's this like sort of play on who buys who the rose, and then we go into the green, and I like the transition to the green and just the way they sort of portray his like Poison Ivy's influence on him there. He just kind of ignores Selina, and I think each panel in that was done really well, and getting that across. I feel like I could have not read any of the text in that whole chapter. I knew exactly what was happening.
That actually has... Oh, sorry, I was going to say, actually has one of my favourite pages. Is it where they're sitting at the dining table and you've got Bruce one end and Poison Ivy the other, and all the ivy is just growing up around them? I'm just looking for it now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love
There's a
that.
few pages like that where it's just the interaction of like poison ivy's just leaves are just there. It's just green, kind of like growing towards, and then just like black Bruce Wayne or Batman, just the darkness.
And then this gorgeous double page spread when Catwoman just jumps on the table and ruins everything. And it's like, I've seen this before. I could reenact this. It's when my cat jumps up on the table when I'm eating dinner. And yeah, I was going to say, like, for the same reasons, Ray, that you enjoy, you mentioned that you liked the visuals in the Scarecrow chapter. That's one of the reasons I was going to say I liked it, because I like it when they're doing the fear toxin thing. I like the double page spread of the Scarecrow on the horse and the horse rearing up when he makes his escape and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I was just thinking about another moment or chapter that I did quite like is the Christmas chapter for. I think it's the introduction of the Joker in the story, but then also I was like in comic book stories where they have these kind of human moments or human relatable moments, and I think it's one of the first times where the case, as it were, starts to really hit on the Dentz's sort of home life, and I think Joker shows up in his house, and just as a human moment, you can understand like a stranger in your house, and you can really relate to and empathize with that fear of this stranger. I mean, in this case, it's a Joker, who's like the worst person to show up at your house. But just in general, I really like when comic book movies with all these, fantastic villains and heroes can bring forward these like human moments that everyone can relate to, and this does it really well, just having the Joker turn up and then having to sort of fight and get out to protect, he'll get him out to protect his family. I quite like that moment in the story.
Leon, you have any favourite chapters, favourite moments?
It's tough because I think different things work well, but it's hard to sum up like a particular chapter. So just a few points here and there. At first, especially on this reading, when Grundy shows up, I was like, oh man, like what's the point? He's like, I remember his storyline goes nowhere. But then rereading it in its entirety, I kind of like the Grundy parts and the fact that he's detached from everything else, because it feels like it's the point. Like he literally in the sewers is like a society outcast, and I kind of like with Thanksgiving where Batman leaves him a meal because they go down there and he's like, man, I haven't got no beef with you today. Like, yeah. I'm dealing with him. And I kind of like how when Harvey Dent goes down there, all like bandaged up, and he gets out of the thing as being attacked by completing the nursery rhyme, and they kind of like how they have that weird bonding thing, and it felt less superfluous and more sort of like he doesn't really need to be part of this storyline, like overarching storyline, but it's cool that he's there because he's in a way he's a bit of a reminder of like the rest of this like world and like who else is getting cast aside and screwed by like the system, and that leads me to like a thing more so than I maybe alluded to earlier when I was saying like in Hush, heroes showing up, rogues showing up, because I think that it's cool in Hush, it doesn't feel as wide into the story, whereas this, for the most part, when the rogues show up, they do feel wired into the story or like the theming at the time, and that's what makes it feel less like Rogue of the Week and more like Gotham is a living, breathing city that has some of these people locked up, but a lot of these people are not locked up, and they're just going to be doing their own thing, robbing people at Christmas or like going to rich people's safes. And all sorts of shenanigans, so that by the time that Falcone is actually hiring these people or like getting them early release, who knew that Falcone was for justice reform? But like as he's releasing them out, it makes more sense because like they're a resource, and it ties in with the sort of like faux semi-revelation at the end about who Holiday is, and it's like it's this whole thing of like the notion that like, the regular gangster mafia crime that's like the old generation thing, like that time is over, and now because of the like Batman and his escalation that he sort of thinks about because he knows what Gordon's getting at, but like he's in like a sense of self-denial. That what we get is now in the age of like the costume supervillain because of that, and I kind of like how that one element, me thinking about Grundy's place in this all again, kind of lets all the other pieces fall into place for me in terms of this thriving, breathing, awful city.
Yeah, I was going to make an interesting point, actually, Leon. Like, upon reading it and thinking back about the point where Grundy turns up and thinking about it just as you were talking about it, actually, there, that could easily be Killer Croc.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would have liked it better or they could have done something more interesting if it had been Killer Croc. Because yeah.
I like that it's Grundy because Grundy's a bit more of a like muted character. He's not
the most pathetic for that reason. Yeah,
and he's less gregarious. He just has his existence, and he's almost like a Pokemon.
I just have this thing going like a whole other way of like the Thanksgiving thing being Killer Croc and like Waylon Jones something cannibal Thanksgiving dinner with a bunch of crocodiles in the sewer. I don't know why. It's just something that just occurred to me. Like they could have taken it down that route and had some Waylon Jones in there. But yeah, I do like the I like the inclusion of Grundy. But yeah, that could easily have been Killer Croc, and they could have done something interesting with that. But I think that's just me just writing fan comics now in my head. So
I do have a favorite half of a chapter, if that counts, because like I really like the opening to Independence Day, chapter number 10, because it like starts off with a murder. It starts off with a black and white 6-panel thing, and then goes into my favorite double page spread, which is like a view from under a bridge of the coroner having just been murdered, and there's like fireworks going off in the background, and it has a very like noir Manhattan vibe. I really like these couple of pages. I don't like where the rest of that chapter goes because I think the Scarecrow stuff is kind of ridiculous, but that opening is really good.
I want my noir detective saxophone music.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one. Sorry to go back to a thing we've already talked about, but like the pacing overall in this comic, I feel like lends itself really well to that like noir jazzy saxophone, like languid, I don't know, slightly pompous and pontificating thing that noir stories do. Like it really works with Batman's little monologues and like self-absorbed speeches.
Yeah, but it's even constructed that way, isn't it? Because like, you know, like you think of like the stereotypical like archetypal characters that you see in these noir detective stories and things, like where they have like the detective, she came into my office and sat on my desk and told me this and whatever. Yeah. Like Catwoman, Selena Kyle is the femme fatale. Like she fits that kind of like where she turns up in the story and messes with the detective. Like it would happen in an actual like detective noir tale. Catwoman kind of fits into that slot. And each of them, if you think about it, like the way the story is, it is constructed in that way on purpose. It actually is a noir detective story.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, Tazziii, like every time Catwoman or Selena's on page, like it puts him off kilter slightly. I think, yeah, that's something I wasn't reading as much into when I was going through it, but that's, yeah, I'm going to have to read it with that in view again.
Put some saxophone on and read it again.
Yeah, maybe I will. Has anyone else got any other, like, specific, like, moments or, like, changes in color or changes in panel construction or whatever that work for them? Like, we've talked about a couple, but, like, one that I wanted to bring up was close towards the end where Batman drops into a room where all the villains are hanging out. Essentially, I'm trying not to give too much away, but he drops in and drops some gas smoke canisters, and like the world fades into grayscale. And I thought that was really funky because like you're seeing what he would see through the haze of the smoke. Was there anything else that anyone like noted like that?
That bit is wonderful, Ray, and that bit comes after another fantastic panel where they're all kind of lined up at the desk. All the villains, the entire Rose Gallery, kind of lined up at the desk, kind of like Renaissance painting style, saying "trick or treat." And then you've got this full panel page of Harvey Two-Face flipping a coin with a gun, and both of these things are things that I have contemplated many a time, getting blown up onto canvas and putting on my wall.
Nice.
It's a great image.
Yeah.
I think their use of sort of like the viewpoint was really well done. I think the scene just before Dent gets the acid thrown in his face, when we're first sort of brought into the courtroom, and it's like a really high top like viewpoint of sort of like not quite top down, but sort of at a high angle, taking it all in, and it takes up the 2 pages.
Yeah.
So, and they sort of use that throughout, like different sort of points of view, and where the sort of like camera angle would be. I think they just use that really interestingly. It really like helps to change the tone of each scene.
Yeah, you make a good point with the top-down courtroom thing, because it actually it sets the scene really well. It introduces the locale really well, and it gives you a fantastic idea of how busy that place is, right, and what's going on, because the amount of people you can see in there. It's like, yeah, you make that is actually a great couple of panels there. Actually, it's a good double pager.
Like everyone has witnessed this.
Yeah,
this acid attack.
I've got a couple of other things. So, like, every time, or not, maybe not every time, but I wasn't sure if this happens towards the end of the book, but like early on in the comic, there's bits where a new character or a new significant character is introduced, and they get like a specific small rectangular like Art Deco frame, like a black and white frame. And I feel like that's something that's there to highlight and effectively highlights, new people of interest. I like how there's a couple of not even chapters, but like beats within the chapters. Again, early on, where like it's pages of rectangles, and then the bottom right is like a beat or a moment captured in a circle. To like, I think the pacing of these things, where it's like, it's Bruce rejecting Falcone's like involvement into his own company, and he says, somewhere in the city I know that the Roman is smiling, and like it shows Falcone's face in this circle, and then that's repeated like in its construction over and over again. So you get to see like over the next couple of months, like selling this montage of this time sequence of Batman or Bruce stopping the things that are like stopping Falcone's plans, but also we see that he's slowly falling into his plans at the same time. I think that's really cool, like this little peephole into this punctuation.
Yeah, definitely. Has anybody else got anything else they want to add?
Batman's cape. I feel like just Batman's cape in this comic is just so well. Yeah, it's just so much of when he is in a panel, the cape. I think there's one panel it's when Scarecrow has escaped, and he's kind of just looking out the window, and we're sort of looking at him from sort of not quite from above, but quite a high angle, and it's just like cape.
Like from behind, I think. And
yeah.
You see like just all over the floor, and
and it like crawls along the floor and curls up at the edges and stuff.
Yeah,
like, his cape has a life of its own. Yeah,
definitely.
And there's a lot of moments where his cape kind of is used to sort of cast the shadows we've talked about, or just really have like this big menacing Batman figure all over the place.
It's kind of the point of the cape on the costume, isn't it? Because if you think about it, if he's going to strike fear into the criminal underworld by dressing as a bat, then you know,
Go all
the
the way.
cape is going to be a large part of that, because that's going to make him look ethereal and like some kind of in the right kind of light, like some sort of wereback creature with wings, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
I like that his cape in this is quite organic though. Like it moves
Yeah.
like somewhat realistically. It's not like Spawn where you see like the walls and stuff. Like it's I like that it's sort of grounded but still larger than life.
As I say,
Yeah.
90s cape physics in comics is a that's an episode in itself, I think. For things like Spawn and stuff like that, with like the way capes were back then, like shoulder ornamentation as well. Like, don't get me started on shoulder ornamentation. But yeah, no, yeah, Batman's cape in this is fantastic. Leon, anything to add? Anything else?
I mean, you can still talk about more stuff to do with this, but I'll just wrap up. I think this is I kind of like how it's a story where Batman kind of failed. I love all the stuff where it's like, I believe in Harvey Dent was obviously that was brought into Dark Knight as a campaign slogan. I believe in Jim Gordon, and I believe in Gotham. I do love that, those mantra things, because I think those are like core to Batman, because he's like had to close the door on everyone but a few people, including Alfred. And in like such a toxic place, like for him to have the closest thing to friends and allies is quite a cool thing. And I always like different depictions of like the Batman Gordon friendship. I do like the notion of how family is dealt with in the book. I love all the stuff because you got all this stuff with all these different crime families, and because it was like a issue by issue thing, we reminded every issue who is who, which is cool. And I love all the stuff where it's like, this person, like, would they kill their own son to do that? But there's the question mark is there, and then on top of that, you've got the whole thing about like the mafia or La Cosa Nostra being like a family in itself, and how even like people who are in other cities are in your family still have designs on your city, and how like no one really trusts each other, no one really has any time for each other, but they've got this like faux thing of like, oh, show up for weddings and like big sort of talking about like, oh yeah, blah blah, like your family this and your family that, but really it doesn't mean anything. And then the children who are brought into the family are kind of have their lives like destroyed even worse, where the son who was like a Rhodes Scholar and was an MBA at Harvard or whatever, he's the one who for like he just wants some of his dad's attention. He just wants some of his dad's attention, so he gets himself like wrapped up into this for no reason and takes the fall. And my favorite part of all of this is how it kind of is, if you forget any following comics after this, it kind of is left ambiguous to a degree. And I like that, because even though you have certain people saying who did what, it's not fully nailed down. We don't get like a flashback series of panels of like, this person did this one, this person did this one. And I really like that. I kind of like how messy it is and how the threads are sort of just left there for you to tie up yourself.
The last thing I want to add to this actually is how this book tells this story, but doesn't just have the spotlight on one character as it's doing it. It tells it from different points of view, and you get to see there's like whole, like you'll go like a whole 4 pages before you see Batman in a Batman comic, which I think is quite interesting for the way the story is told in this and the way that it works, as in it's a story about Batman, Harvey Dent, and all these other characters, and not just primarily one character. It's not just a Batman story, which I really like. The fact that we get to see through these people's eyes, and we get to see these events unfold from different points of view, and we don't just get to see the event happen and then how that affects the immediate kind of circle involved with it. We see the event happen, and then we see the ripples like throughout Gotham, which I quite like about it. And to add something to what you were just saying there, Leon, is this basically the B-side to The Sopranos then? The DC remix? or The Godfather.
So much Godfather in this.
I know. Even down, is it even down to the way the Roman looks?
Yeah.
Especially at the start, like the way he's introduced is extremely Godfather.
Yeah. With those claw scars on his face that I think Catwoman gave him at some point.
Must have been.
In an earlier story, but yeah. And
the murder in the bath as well is is straight out of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that wraps us up. Actually, I think because we could talk about this ad infinitum, but I don't think the people listening. Have you listening guys got the attention span to go over an hour and a half? I don't know. So we're gonna leave it there, and we're gonna wrap this up. So that has been Ace Comicals episode number 88, and we have just discussed Batman: The Long Halloween. And if I give you the credits for said book, we have the writer is Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale is the artist, colors by Gregory Wright, letters by Richard Starkins and Comicraft, and that is Batman: The Long Halloween, which is available pretty much anywhere in print. I suggest you go buy it from your LCS though, because right now they could use the money. And yeah, so that's been Ace Comicals episode number 88. You can find us in all the usual places where you find podcasts. You find us in www.acecomicals.com, which is kind of the hub for everything we do. You can find us on Twitter under Ace Comicals. You can find us on Facebook under Ace Comicals. You can find me on Twitter under @Batto. That's BATTOU. Nigel, where can we find you?
The best place for us is just myamada.com or myamada on Twitter and myamada tees on Instagram, because someone already had myamada and they beat me to it. But our website has like all our information on our comics, our events, and everything else we do.
And Tazziii, where can we find you?
You can find me at Tazziii on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, or Tazziii with an X at the end on Twitch.
And Leon, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Leon Everett.
Ray, where can we find you?
I'm frantically grinding my beans on Twitter at Monkeh, MOONKEH.
Grind those beans.
Whatever gets you up in the morning, innit?
Well, now you've got me thinking of the Locust in Gears of War, where they turn up with the big machine guns. I think they're actually called grinders, aren't they?
I think they are.
They literally stomp through the level going grind, and then you just get machine gun fire across, and yeah. So
Please.
this is it.
Please don't ruin my morning ritual, Craig.
Stomping around the house half asleep in your dressing gown. Grind! But yeah, so we're on Apple Podcasts, CastBox, Castro, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. You can also buy t-shirts now. We have two designs available at the moment, available at acecomicals.threadless.com, which is our little t-shirt shop. You can buy said designs on mugs and magnets and stickers and everything else that's kind of cool. If you are so inclined, you can, or you feel so inclined, you can donate the price of a coffee at ko-fi.com/acecomicals. Anything donated, any t-shirts bought, help keep the lights on here at the podcast. So there we go. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to our guests for joining us today, actually.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been great to have you on. We'll have to get you on more often now.
Get me into more comic books.
Yeah. yeah, next time we'll have to get you guys involved more often now. Get you on for a couple episodes just talking about, because we do, like, obviously we do these long form chats, but we also do the where we just kind of like talk about things that we've read over the week, which are a little bit more breezy. So yeah, we'll have to get you on for a couple of those sometime, maybe, that kind of thing. But yeah, thank you for joining us. And yeah, this is Ace Comicals, over and out.